Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining me. I appreciate it. So welcome to my extra guest bedroom here. Thanks for being here. I'm Craig White. I'm a faculty member. For those of you who don't know me, I'm an accounting professor at the Anderson School, University of New Mexico. I see some of my friends and colleagues on the call. Again, I appreciate everyone being here. Before I get into the material for today, I want to send a shout out and a thank you to STC and to Innovation Academy, to Rob and Lisa and Kara and Cecilia. Thanks for all what you're doing. Thanks for setting this up. Really appreciate it. And they've made it straightforward and simple. So that's all you can ask for, which is great. So hopefully you'll find this of benefit today. I'll tell you my approach and what I'm doing and where I'm going with this. There's a lot of information out there about the business relief provisions. And from what I've seen, it's kind of scattered in a lot of different ways. I think, a lot of it goes into in depth, but what I'm aiming for here today is I thought it might be useful to go through where this has been over the past month. What's the genesis of this with Congress and then with the state, and show you in more totality what all there is out there. So I'm going to show you and walk you through what the 3 relief provision bills are that Congress had put in place. And I'm going to highlight the very specific provisions which are meant to help small businesses. And then from that, I've posted a lot of information. And this information is going to go to STC. They're going to post it to a Dropbox link on their website. So if anything of this rings a bell with your accord that you want to look into more deeply, you can take this overview I'm giving, and hopefully this will help you drill down into that more specific information and those resources that are out there that are associated with that. So with that, let me show you get started where I'm going with this. Oh, and by the way we're going to handle questions is Cecilia is going to help me with that towards the end. We'll use the chat feature, and either she'll read them to me or I'll see them myself at that point. Just something I kind of picked up. We're doing a lot of this at UNM class-wise. It's kind of, to me, it's helpful to either know whether you're asking live questions or chat. So I think we'll stick with the chat towards the end and see what y'all would like to talk about. So I'm thinking, and somebody jump if you haven't, but you should be able to see my screen. So what I've got on my screen is, this is what the, whoops, sorry, I've got some people in the waiting room. Let me admit them while we're doing it. This is all kind of, okay, I think I got them in there as well. So what I've got up on the screen is, this is what you would see on the Dropbox file of the information I've compiled and what I'm going to be walking through via the PowerPoint presentation. And this will be available if you want to go into it in more depth. So just to roadmap you a little bit backwards from where I'm going, I've got out here a PDF. This is from the Senate Conference Committee. This is a Small Business Owner's Guide to the Kerrs Act. So it's got an explanation of each of the provisions, the Paycheck Protection Program and how it links in with the Emergency Loan Program and so forth. So it's super helpful in terms of questions and about what you can do at the same time and what you can't. So I would definitely recommend this one to you as we go through it. It's out there for you to look at, and I'll highlight as I get to it in my presentation. This one, Small Business Cash Flow Relief Options. This is a chart which again goes through those provisions from the SBA that are available to small businesses, highlights the different provisions, and shows what you can and can't use at the same time. So again, I think it's a really useful tool to help you guidepost where you might want to go further as you maybe look to implement this, or if you have, just to see, okay, what have I done already? Because I realize, we're 2 or 3 weeks into this. Some of you may have already moved forward with some of these provisions. This next item that I'll go over and hit on is Small Business Cash Flow Flowchart. This is a tool that comes with our research tool that we have at UNM, Research Institute of America. They've produced some specific guidance for CPAs dealing with small business provisions. This flowchart is a step-by-step kind of best case, what's the right fit in terms of the PPP or the emergency loans or both, or if you have an existing SBA loan, how does that link in with those others in terms of where do you go for assessing what your cash flow needs are relative to the program. So I think that'll be helpful to you. This one, critical resources, that is, again, kind of a listing. You've probably seen quite a few of these. My relief presentation, I'll get into this in just a minute. these three bills that you're going to find in the Dropbox link, hold on one second, let me see who's out in the waiting room. I'll admit everyone who's there again. These are the three bills. These are the actual congressional bills that were passed and signed. So you have the Families First bill, you have the Kerrs Act, and then you have the original bill from about a month and a half ago, which seems like forever ago, which was the, if you recall, that was the bill way back when President Trump and Congress were saying, well, do we need 2.3 billion or do we need 8 billion or whatever it was. That was the bill that was originally passed to help fund the government's response to COVID back towards the end of February. The last thing that I wanted to highlight before getting into the presentation is these folders, these have specific, and I'll show you, these are specific provisions within the different titles of the Kerrs Act. So if you want to learn more about the rebates for individuals, for instance, it's in here. So the detail from our tax guidance is in here with the details about what the rules are, specifically how they work, and then with links as to where you can get more information about each one of those. Okay, so with that, it's going to be out there. I'll toggle back and forth between these two as we go through the presentation, and I'll dive into these a little bit more once I go through the PowerPoints. So moving into the PowerPoints, this again is going to be out there in the, it's included in the Dropbox link. I thought what I would begin with in terms of the presentation, this is from Stacy Sacco. He got this from the Hispano Chamber via Jim Garcia. This is from McKinsey & Company. They've got a really good presentation that you may have seen at one of the webinars going through how the government's going to have to react in general to the crisis and how it's going to affect business in general. So I thought this was kind of an interesting jumping off point, just saying macro level, the way the government reacts, which is the bills I'm going to be going through, that's going to have an effect on how well we come out of this. So, you know, in terms of these two axes, you know, the quality of the economic rebound is going to be somewhat a function of control of the virus itself. So that's the actual health side of things, combined with strong policy responses on this axis, highly effective interventions. So to the extent that the public health is successful, combined with the right policy moves, that's going to determine whether we bounce back quickly, which is what's shown in this cell, or if we are on the other side, which we hope and pray we're not, if we have a broad failure of public health interventions, ineffective policy interventions, well, it's going to be more drawn out and extended. So everything that we can all do and Congress can do and our representatives push us out farther out here is better for, obviously, for everyone. So that as a beginning point, and then as Congress's response. This one I want to use as my organizing framework, which again, I've got out there in that Dropbox. I've got these actual bills themselves. So these are the three bills that Congress has passed as their response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So you may have heard of the 3 phases, and then as of today, phase 3.5. Well, it's referring to these 3 acts, and then the I'll mention in a little bit the today, hopefully, I think they're passing the refill of the Paycheck Protection Program. So putting some more money in there. The first bill was the Coronavirus Preparedness and Response Supplemental Appropriations Act, and I'll mention this in a second. Then came the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, and the one that's probably gotten the most play and the most complicated bill itself is the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or the Kerrs Act, as it's more commonly known. This first one is the one I mentioned that was back, like I said, it seems like forever ago. About end of February, beginning of March, the Congress recognized we were going to have a real problem and issue with COVID-19 and put in place supplemental funding to the SBA, to the CDC, to Department of Labor, you name it. If you look at this bill, it was supplemental appropriations to help fund the response the federal government recognized it was going to have to take to be able to effectively ramp up to meet the scale of what was coming down the pike at that point. So this, if you look, and it's in the Dropbox that you'll be able to access, it's pretty much a laundry list of appropriations to government agencies to help fund their operations. So this one I'm not going to go into too much in the presentation. So now starting into the things that I do want to get into more, and please bear with me as we bounce around here a little bit in terms of where things go. Hopefully you all are seeing all this. This is the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. So what I've done is I've copied the different elements of this because I want you to be able to see in the Families First and in the Kerrs Act, I want you to be able to see the whole thing to get an idea of the scope and then where the small business provisions are fitting into that general framework that Congress has put into place. I think that just kind of helps us understand, you know, from that first slide, what's the framework the government is working on overall to be able to address the pandemic and, you know, and really the extent of what needs to be addressed. So this was the second bill that was passed, Families First Coronavirus Response Act, produced nutrition waivers, you know, some funding and programs for school lunches and so forth were included in there. The thing I wanted to focus on for this presentation is this, and I've highlighted all the things I focused on in yellow, the Emergency Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act. Okay, this provision is the mandatory requirement for businesses to expand access to family and medical leave. So it's got two components that you'll see here. It's got this individual component, Emergency Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act, and then it's got the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act. And as you get into this, you'll see that it's both for the worker themselves and then for their family members. And what I've done, and hopefully you'll find this useful, again, I want to put it in the scope of here's the overall, but then how do you drill down to find more information? This link takes you to the actual requirements of businesses relative to this provision. So this is the temporary rule. This is from the Department of Labor. So they quickly put out a rule saying, here's how businesses have to react to this. And this came out as of now, April 1st, so about 3 weeks ago, they put this into effect. So this is dealing with employers that have fewer than 500 employees. And we're gonna look at this in a second. So there's this mandatory provision side where if you look in here, here's the requirements that you have to provide to your employees in terms of their paid time off, sick leave, the expansion of really the Family Medical Leave Act. So that's the more mandatory side. Well, it is the mandatory side. But then also we're going to look at, there's the tax credit side. So the way Congress has funded this is it's made it mandatory for you as small business owners to cover employees in this fashion, to offer this relief for COVID. So details are going to be here. So I'm not going to go into all the details of each of these because there's a lot, but I want to provide you with the resources in the framework. So here's the requirements under this temporary rule. But then I'll show you also where the IRS link is, how you apply for the credits. That's the other flip side of this, where that's the funding mechanism to help small businesses offer this to employees, but then not be out of pocket via the tax credit side. So again, this is some of the specifics about what you're required to do, providing 80 hours of paid sick leave to covered employees. And it goes into it here more about who they are and how that works. And then also it gets into down here, if you find this of use, it's got additional information, you know, temporary rule, paid leave, press release about how the government's going to implement this, and then drilling down more specifics, here's the webinar about how this is going to be implemented from the government's standpoint. Okay, so that's the structure of what I'm doing here in my presentation. So this is the first part, which is the medical leave. See if I can get back to where I want to be on my presentation. Okay. So that's that. So that link, as you get this, to be able to drill down, see here's the actual rule. This Families First, the second division, Unemployment Insurance Stabilization and Business Act. This is, here's the link to it. It's not so much for our group, it's more for the states. This was funding that was meant to go straight out into the states to increase the ability to administer and the funding for the increase in unemployment that the government saw was going to be coming. So if you're interested in this, this is more of the rules about coverage of unemployment insurance and what the states are required to do to provide access to that unemployment insurance. So that's in that section if you want to drill down and learn more about that. This one, this Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act, again, it's the Department of Labor. This is the preliminary rule that was just put out within the past few weeks. That is similar to what I showed you above, which provides you that information about what you're required to do as the employer, who it covers with your employees, and then it gives a little piece about what the funding is in order to cover the requirements that you will be under. So moving forward, this Division G, this is where it brought in the credit side. So this is the payment side for the family medical leave expansion relative to COVID. So as a small business, you have access, well, you have obligations in terms of coverage, but you also have access to credits to help cover this. If you're in, this is the link to the IRS website, which provides that information. So here's the specifics of these small and mid-sized business credits under the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, questions and answers. So this is where you need to go if you're interested in saying, okay, I need to do this. How am I going to get it covered via my tax returns? So here it goes into the overview of what's required to be covered. But then down here, it gets into what are the procedures to actually apply for the credit itself through the IRS and through the forms at that point. So that's where I point you to learn more about it. As a CPA, this is obviously something that you may want to be working with your CPAs, and I know they've ramped up quite a bit in terms of their business advisory services, and they're ready to help as well as, you know, just for their clients and as a public service. So this is where they would come in to help with this sort of information. Okay, so that's the Family First budget. Family First relief provisions, mainly focused on expansion of family medical leave, and for small businesses, the credits to pay and supplement those. So moving on, I want to go into the next one, which is the Kerrs Act. Okay, so that was the Families First. That was about the scope of it. I mentioned that was smaller than the Kerrs Act. The Kerrs Act itself, which came out towards the end of March, was the much broader and more in-depth relief provisions that have been out there for small businesses. So let me admit anyone who's waiting before we go into this. Okay, so here is the Division A, Keeping Workers Paid and Employed, Healthcare System Enhancements and Economic Stabilization. Keeping American Workers Paid and Employed Act, Title I of the Kerrs Act. This is where you find all the detail relative to the Small Business Administration programs that have been in the news. So you see Section 1102, that's the Paycheck Protection Program. I'll go into that in a little bit more detail in a second. Section 1106, that provides for loan forgiveness for existing SBA loans that small business might have. I've got the information out there about this as well within those folders. Section 1110 is emergency grants and aid. That's the $10,000 per small business that was authorized through this portion of the act. And then Section 1112, that is subsidy for certain loan payments. So that's the one actually is the one for existing loans that the government won't require repayment of that for the next 6 months. The detail there is in this portion of the act. So with that, let me take you to what I was showing you within my information. So here's, after this, you know, it's very detailed, so you're gonna have to look into this yourself more if there's something here that looks like it's gonna be very applicable to you. So this is the organization. So on the PowerPoint, what I've listed there, this is what's found in the Dropbox that you're gonna have access to for the detail. So within this, I've got the information on each one of these specific programs. So here's the one from our tax research tool at UNM, Forgiveness for Paycheck per Program Loans. Okay, so this goes into the detail of that aspect of the Paycheck Protection Program. that's saying that if you get this loan, you don't have to pay it back. The details are found in here. And it also links you out to some more information about how that works in more detail. Oops. The Paycheck Protection Program itself is also found in here. So again, I leave this to you to go into more detail about this. The Paycheck Protection Program, this is the one that's gotten a lot of information in news lately that is meant to cover employers paying to keep their staff on board. So if you're in a situation where you're doing that, that's where you can apply for one of these payroll protection loans, or if you're applying it to payroll, those loan proceeds, you can actually apply under this information to have those loans forgiven. And that's the benefit that the government has put out there to try and help in this time right now to keep employees on board. Here's the information about the economic injury disaster loans, EDLs. So that's also put out there, and the SBA debt repayment relief. Okay, so all that information is here in this Dropbox for you to take a look at. So in terms of going through this in a little bit more detail as we go, let me go ahead and pull this up again to show you what's out here. So this section of the Kerrs Act, that portion, the SBA, these provisions, showing you exact detail, more discussion there in that one folder. Here's a summary from our UNM tax program that gets into this. It goes through each one of these with the program description, the maximum available, staff size limitations, what's available via the guarantee, the rate of interest that's applicable to it, repayment timing, and then exclusivity. And what's meant by that is if you are interested in one of these provisions, you may only be able to take advantage of this one without being eligible for another if you take advantage of this specific one. So for instance, what this is saying, what I mean by that is this Paycheck Protection Program. If you put in for that, you can use that, and then with the potential debt forgiveness for keeping your employees on the payroll. And that goes into that here. But if you do that, you are not eligible for the employee retention credit via the Internal Revenue Code. So this we'll get into in a second, but this employee retention credit, this was another aspect of the Kerrs Act, which is similar to the Families First tax credits, where this is another mechanism that is in place for businesses to be able to recoup the costs of not laying off employees. So if your small business does not take out a Paycheck Protection Program loan, you would likely qualify for the employee retention credit, where you're going to get credited back to you and your business amounts for the payroll that you've paid to those employees. And that's also on this side in conjunction with the payroll tax deferral. So there's provisions under the Kerrs Act that we'll see here in a few minutes where employers can defer payroll tax payments to the federal government if they aren't using the payroll protection program type of loan. So the government put in place various mechanisms. So that, again, this could be important if, you know, as recently this program ran out of money because it got topped out. As of today, I believe they're putting more money in, so that could be accessible to you if you haven't gotten this type of loan yet or sought to apply for it. If it tops out again or you choose not to use that, I would recommend taking a look at these employee retention credits. And the information, again, is here to check your eligibility and as a potential other revenue source to cover those sorts of usage. Okay, so that's what's meant by the exclusivity. Here's the information in this column regarding that other provision in the Kerrs Act, the disaster loans. So this is who it applies to and how that's utilized. And then this is the SBA debt relief program. This is payment assistance on existing SBA loans. So if you have existing SBA loans, you likely qualify for payment assistance on the requirements that you already have in place. Okay, so I would lend you to point this out to you to take a look at that. So that's out there relative to those Kerrs Act provisions. And this is in the PowerPoint itself, but I'll make a point of looking at it here because it's a little bit easier to see here. This is another tool that we got from our tax research that might be useful to you. This is a flow chart giving a high-level view of analyzing whether you want to go for that PPP, Paycheck Protection Program loan, or if there's a regular SBA loan might be a better alternative, or is it maybe something you just want to look at those credits. So this is what this tool is for, to give you some idea of the parameters in terms of assessing your cash flow and how those programs might fit in to help with those. So it'll walk you through, you know, the number of employees do you have? Do you have an existing SBA 7A loan? Here, if the answer is yes, this would point you to that provision that says you are eligible for automatic 6-month covered payments and fees of that. So that's the purpose of this. If you don't, well then you likely have immediate cash flow needs, which leads you down here to this branch of the flow chart, probably indicating that it's a good idea to seek through your local bank, so far application to the PPP, or in combination with the Paycheck Protection Program, the SBA emergency loan provisions, which is this EIDL program, which comes with actually an automatic $10,000 grant. So really, there's probably not too much downside to these. You may have already figured that out. If you're just hearing about it, I would encourage you to look through this information and kind of focus down here, because you might be able to get this $10,000 to help you out immediately in conjunction with these other, this other help from the Small Business Administration. Okay, so moving back to this. So again, hopefully you're seeing how I've organized this. This is the overall law itself, and then I'm drilling down into, here's some information for you on these highlighted areas that might be useful. So here's this flow chart that I mentioned. This is just within the presentation itself. The bigger one's in the Dropbox file you'll have access to. Here's the comparison of the different programs I just walked you through briefly. You know, again, the bigger version of this is within that file. So I would encourage you, if you want to read the act itself, it's there. I put the 3 acts out there so you can read the home original provision that authorized this, and then you can drill down into how this is laid out to help small businesses. So with that in mind, you know, again, my goal here is really to provide information and pull some of this together, what's out there in general. Here are some links in the PowerPoint directly to the SBA and the guidance that they provide. So if you click on this, once you get this, this is going to link you directly up to what the SBA has put out there. Here's in another version of this, coronavirus funding options. Some of the things I've walked you through. This is the discussion through the SBA. It's going to be here through this link. And the second one is also an additional link along those same lines. I included this today. I haven't been busy on other things and prepping for this. As of this writing, which was yesterday, Senate passed a bill increasing the PPP funding by $310 billion. So you're probably aware the original funding was tapped out within 2 weeks. So it went quickly, and then there was some controversy over some publicly traded corporations that were accessing it, and they're saying, well, really, is that really what the intent was? So from what I've heard, I have heard a little bit today, I think Treasury is tightening up on that access to really try and target it more to true small businesses. So I would assume this is, if it's not already there, it's coming out soon, additional funds into the PPP. And then also an additional $60 billion into the emergency loan provisions that I pointed out just a couple minutes ago. So hopefully this may be a good time to look into this again. It's first come, first serve. But if you go through this, if you want to do it, hopefully there's going to be that funding available out there. This slide, I mentioned, I wanted to show you the whole thing. The whole bill is in the Dropbox. But here's the overview. Again, to give you an idea of the scope of the Kerrs Act and everything that's included within it. I haven't highlighted anything here in yellow, so I'm not going to go over this specifically, but this is, I want to show you the whole thing. This is the unemployment insurance provisions with subtitle A. So it goes through all these different things for emergency staffing, ramp up of unemployment funding, and so forth. And I know there's hiccups on this, there's trouble with this. I mean, it's just hard to go from 0 to 60 that fast. But here's where the government was trying to kind of get out, maybe not in front of, but like to try and work with it to address the unemployment portion. Moving forward to Title II, this is an area that I have put quite a bit of information out here for your access. This part, Subtitle B of the Kerrs Act, are rebates and other individual provisions. So these are all of them. So again, this is out there. I'll talk through some of these and I'll leave it to you to go look at the specific information. So Section 2201, this is the provision that authorized the IRS to send the rebates to individuals. It's 2020 recovery rebates. This is the law that passed that. The information that I put out there describes who's eligible for it, what are the phase outs, what's the process. So that's all out in that supporting information. So I would point you to that if you're curious, and I've got a couple IRS links that'll also bring you to a place where you can get more information. Section 2202, special rules for use of retirement funds. This is a provision that is aimed at people who've, well, it is broader than this, but I think it's mainly aimed at people who were laid off or who were furloughed, who may not have much in terms of emergency funding for themselves. Their main assets may be their 401ks, say in their IRA accounts. Well, what this is allowing, special rules for use of retirement funds, individuals can pull monies out if they're under financial distress or if they have medical expenses related to COVID. They can pull money out of their IRA accounts or 401ks without the 10% penalty tax that you would typically run into if you pulled it out before age 59 and a half. So not really the recommended way to help fund what's going on, but this is something that's available and was meant to be a little less onerous without that 10% tax. So again, the details are in the supplied materials. 2203 is temporary waiver required minimum distribution rules for retirement plans and accounts. So for 2020, if you're familiar, at retirement age, you have, once you reach age 70 and a half, there's required distributions you have to pull out so the government can tax your deferred retirement accounts. Well, that's being waived for this year. So that's going to provide all sorts of planning opportunities for individuals in that case. If you're waiting for the market to come back, maybe that's a good thing because you don't have to pull money out at the downturn. So that's this provision. Again, that's out there in the folder. 2204. Allowance of partial above the line deduction for charitable contributions. This is a provision that's going to allow people to deduct up to $300 as what's known as an above the line deduction. So what that means is typically to get any benefit for tax purposes with your charitable contributions, you have to itemize your deductions. Well, for 2020, for that $300, essentially above the line means you don't have to itemize. You'll get a deduction for adjusted gross income. So you'll be able to take that deduction whether you itemize or not. So I would encourage you, you're probably at a time now, people are helping each other out. That's an opportunity there just for a small piece from the government to get a tax benefit no matter what for charitable contributions. On a bigger scale, is Section 2205, modifications of limitations on charitable contributions during 2020. At a really big scale, if somebody's given a lot of money, there's a 50% of adjusted gross income limitation on how much taxable income can be lowered via charitable contributions in any given year. Well, this provision is extending that. I believe this, if we get into the details, it's maybe, well, it's going to 60%, maybe above. So the idea here is the people who are giving big chunks, they're not going to be hit with these limitations. So this is trying to encourage people to give, that have the means, bigger chunks of money to organizations that are in need, food banks, you know, well, you name it, all sorts of different things right now that need the charitable help. And then finally, in this area, exclusion for certain employer payments of student loans. So if an employer is paying student loans of employees then for this year, where this might typically be taxable to the employee, Congress is giving a break for this year to make that a non-taxable benefit for 2020. And again, with all these, they'll be in that drop box that's available. Okay, so that was the individual provisions on the tax side. Through the Kerrs Act on the tax side for business provisions, these are all the provisions that were put in place that you've probably seen in different places. The first one is the employee retention credit for employers subject to closure due to COVID-19. This provision is the one that I was pointing out on that step-by-step chart that showed the credits for keeping folks on payroll. This is also out in the file folder for this. It goes into detail about how this is used. These rules, again, are exclusive, mutually exclusive with the PPP. You can't use both. This is where this was authorized through the tax code. This was that benefit to try and keep people on payroll. 2302 was that far column on that sheet, delayed payment of employer payroll taxes. This is the portion of the law that authorized that. 2303, and again, these are all out there if you want to get into this more. Modifications for net operating losses. For this year, if your small business is generating a loss, which is probably a pretty high likelihood, given that we've been shut down for 2 months, Congress has expanded the ability to take that loss and carry it back to prior profitable years and generate an immediate refund. Okay, so I would really point this out to you, in thinking about your own situations. If you're losing money this year, through your tax return, you might be able to take that loss and carry it back and generate immediate tax savings. So I would take a look at that. Section 2304 is somewhat similar. What this is under the 2017 Tax Act, with President Trump and Congress coming in at that point, they put limitations on the size of losses that individual businesses could use within a given year. So you can only claim a loss up to 80% of your taxable income. So it forced you to have some taxable income is what the upshot of that provision was. Well, now with what's going on with COVID, that has been taken off. So for 2020, there is no limitation for individuals on how much business loss can be generated for tax purposes. So again, given the situation, that's a high likelihood. So I would point you out to the information in the materials to take a look at that. 2305, probably not applicable to you. This is minimum tax credits for corporations. Again, this is an acceleration provision where you can get access to those more quickly. Section 2306, modifications of limitation on business interest. This is generally geared towards bigger enterprises. So it may or may not apply to you and your business. But what this is again, under that 2017 Tax Act, Congress put in place a limitation on how much interest can be deducted against taxable income. Well, this has effectively pulled that cap off. So if you're obtaining loans and you have interest, on existing or current loans, whereas in the past that interest might have been limited for deductibility, take a look at this information. This pulls that off, so you might be able to deduct more for interest than you would have thought in the past. And again, on all of these, for your general knowledge, and be thinking about this, and again, this is maybe where you would work with your CPA as well, where they could come in and really, really help if you see these as big issues. This 2307, something to be aware of, technical amendments regarding qualified improvements, business property. What this is doing is, it's taking tenant improvements, so like in restaurants, businesses where you're doing qualified tenant improvements to get it ready for business. In the past, those improvements were seen as being part of the building itself. So they were not eligible for immediate expensing, i.e. immediate deduction for tax purposes. This provision is recategorizing some of those tenant improvements into areas where you can immediately write them off for federal tax purposes. So this, combined with this reduction in limitations, is some pretty powerful combinations of incentives along with the loans from the SBA, where if you really pull these together, there's ways to take advantage from a tax perspective in improving cash flows, improving the outcomes, and that's what Congress is intending here. So all these in yellow, again, these are out there in the underlying materials. I didn't highlight this, but if you like, you can look at this, section 2308, temporary exception for excise tax for alcohol used to produce hand sanitizer. So that's out of there right now. If you want to produce hand sanitizer, you're not subject to federal excise taxes. Here's some links for you in the PowerPoint presentation. This one in particular, this one goes to the IRS's guidance on the employee retention credit. So that's specifically to that. So I would encourage you to look at that for your employees in conjunction with that other sheet about the payroll protection program, you know, what's better or not, how do those relate to one another. So that's there. The economic impact payments. You can check your status. That's through this website. It gives the information as to how the government was prioritizing those payments, the information they used from like the 2018 tax returns or 2019 tax returns. All of that is found via this website. And then here's the IRS's information regarding the extension of the deadline for tax filing for the 2019 returns. So the deadlines to file and pay federal income taxes, this has all been extended, and you probably know this, but it's extended through July 15th, 2020. And then in here, it's got more specific questions and answers on filing and payment deadline about what you have to pay, you know, which tax and so forth does this fall under. And here's some more about, you know, the credit. I linked you to the main website, and then some other information from the IRS that's available in some other places that links you back to these same spots for IRS help relative to these provisions. So that's all there. Hopefully it'll help in terms of linking through. These next few slides, these are, again, more of the Kerrs Act. I'm not focusing on them in this presentation. Again, this is meant more just I wanted to show you the whole thing. So here's subtitle A is health provisions. So that was like money for masks and supporting hospitals and that sort of stuff. Subtitle B, which is very important to UNM and educational institutions, this gets into provisions helping, institutions of higher education in terms of like room and board and payments they're having to make there. So those provisions, relief is found in this portion of the Kerrs Act. Then subtitle C, which is, here's the detail on that. This is more labor provisions. Expansion of Department of Labor Authority, OMB waiver of paid family and paid sick leave. We went through some of this. It was related to the Families First Act. This was further information that came through the Kerrs Act. Finally, on the Kerrs Act, we had subtitle D, the Finance Committee. That was kind of a technical thing for Congress. Subtitle E, Health and Human Service Extenders, and then subtitle F dealt with over-the-counter drugs. So that was that portion of the Kerrs Act. The remainder of the Kerrs Act, which is this final portion here, this slide, economic stabilization assistance to severely distressed sectors of the United States economy. This subtitle A, if you get into that, that's kind of the initial foray of funding for airlines and other businesses that were just crushed by the COVID pandemic. So if you look in what I put out there, the whole bill, if you're curious, you can read through subtitle A to find the specific provisions relative to those industries. Subtitle B is air carrier worker support. So that was specific provisions for workers of airlines, again, you know, for the obvious reasons of what they're going through. And then some funding, coronavirus relief funds, and then some miscellaneous provisions, United States Postal Service, and Division B, emergency appropriations for coronavirus health response and agency operations. So that's everything. Again, you can look through the details, but I put in the slides, encompass what the whole Kerrs Act looked like. Then highlighted in yellow are the provisions that I think have the most applicability to small businesses and the questions that you might have. So that's the primary portion of the focus of what I've got from the federal perspective. This information combined with those underlying resources. I do have some other federal things in here that I want to point out to you as I have time here. If you're interested in overall federal government news and guidance, this website is everything that the federal government has posted relative to this. So it's just very interesting in and of itself. And it'll link you back to some of the things, subset stuff that I have on here. So here's what is the federal government doing in response to COVID-19, health and safety. So I give you links to those specific programs. There's a lot, travel, immigration, and transportation. If you're interested in what's going to happen from travel advisories and border crossings and international advisories for international travelers, that's all on this website. Money and taxes, this links you back to some of the things I've shown you specifically for the IRS. Education, this has got some great information about Department of Education issues. This is information for schools, goes through the online requirements for schools, school lunches, all that stuff is in here. Federal student aid, information for students, borrowers, and parents. That would apply to us in education and information, well, as a parent and as an educator. This is information to help know what's going on with that. Scams and fraud, you can guess, just sorry people out there taking advantage of this. So some things to be aware of. Benefits and grants, resources for military families, museums, specific types of institutions. There's information here, housing, you name it. It's out here at this link. So I would highly recommend that to you as a one-stop for the government's information regarding what it's doing overall, the federal government. Along those lines, here's some information that's that I found useful in preparing for this, that Forbes has a running couple of sites where they are updating this on an ongoing basis with small business loan programs and other opportunities, both at the federal and the state level. So this is just good practical information that Forbes is compiling on an ongoing basis. So it's pretty accessible and easy to get into. So I would recommend taking a look at this to kind of help supplement this other information. And that's at that level. In terms of the state, I think New Mexico has been doing a really good job, great job of trying to keep everyone involved and up to date. So you've probably seen this, but I would just point it out here. Here's Go New Mexico Business. This is the state's website that has all the resources for New Mexico. It goes into a little bit of the federal things, Paycheck Protection Program, Economic Injury Disaster Loan, again, into the SBA links. But then also going into what specifically, additionally, is New Mexico doing to help small businesses. So that information is down here and can help get you into finding out about that. And then finally, I posted, and this is also in the Dropbox information you're going to have access to. This again is off of the Economic Development website, Critical Actions and First Steps. Just a really good resource from the state of New Mexico that is walking through some of the things that I've been highlighting from what the federal government's been putting out there. What are some of those things you can do? How do you assess that? What are some of the steps to take to think through this process? I think this is super helpful and super good in terms of a framework to be able to think through where you or people that you're working with are at. And with that completes my presentation. I think we have about 10 minutes left. I am open to questions. Most of the things that I have are available out here. I can maybe drill into some of that if there's some questions regarding those things. So let me see about getting, my novice Zoomness is coming out here, about where we're accessing this. So let me see if I can find the chat and see if anybody has any comments or anything anybody would like me to take a look at a little bit further. So let me type on that. Let's see any questions.
Craig, can I ask a question verbally, or you want me to put it in chat? This is Stacy.
Put it verbally. Yeah, I'm kind of tied up in this. There's things I forgot to do. We may have some other folks that have, Stacy, if you have anything to jump in on with other resources or other.
No, I just wanted to say I've watched several webinars with the states, Department of Economic Development, and you've done the best job I've seen of everybody trying to make this thing make sense. So thank you. I'm just very appreciative. And then
Well, you're welcome. Thank you for that, Stacy. That's my goal is, you know, I mean, can't be an expert on all this stuff, obviously, but just put the information, try and put that framework out there. So that's why.
So the only other quick question was I asked a couple of my students to join in today, and they're putting together business plans to end the semester. So I thought, you know, they should know about all this because they may want to build part of this into that plan. So I was thinking, the only thing I'm thinking now is that, quite honestly, if it's a new business, I don't know if they can take advantage of much of this. Do they have, because they don't have employees yet, let's say. But
Well,
is there,
there's some,
yeah, that's the
well,
question.
sorry to interrupt, but you know, I would encourage them to look at the SBA and some of those information I've posted, because there are some loan opportunities for businesses that are just starting out that were not in existence from January through February. So I think that's what Congress had envisioned, you know, maybe moving forward about how do we incentivize new businesses. So I would encourage them not to totally punt, you know, take a look at that.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
And while I've got everyone here, I know there may be some other resources Cecilia sends out. I know there was some possibility of some Native American business resources that they may have access to that might be helpful that, you know, I think she could send out if that comes about. And yeah, anything else, I think just the lines of communication staying open and available is a key outcome as well.
Hey Craig, this is Cecilia. Thank you for your presentation. I just wanted to mention that all the recording of this presentation and then the Dropbox information will all be posted on the globalrainforest.com website that I just sent to everyone in the chat room message, so they can access it through that, and then we'll also send emails to all the registrants with the Dropbox link.
Great. Yeah, that's what I want is everybody able to get to that information. Okay, well, I'm not seeing any other questions or comments. You know, just to conclude, I wish everyone the best. You know, we're here at UNM to help. If there's anything I can do personally or the school, I'm sure we'd all be happy to, you know, lend a hand and give you any information we can that we have access to. So, you know, and again, thank you to STC and Innovation Academy. I think this is a great forum and a great platform to be able to help with this. So thank you everyone, and stay safe and best to you and all your challenges that you are facing with this current environment.
Thank you, Craig.
All right, thank you. Thanks again, Cecilia. Appreciate it.